France, although I hold a New Zealand passport. But if you struggle at some point with my accent, don't hesitate to ask. I won't be upset. That's fine. Actually, it's a bit odd because I've got some sort of two hats in welcoming you here. I usually welcome you all as the sort of coordinator for the AGTA lecture series on behalf of our school because I organize these events. But today I happen to be the one giving the first lecture at the same time. So two birds with one stone somehow. And this is because my work, my research, my practical activities beyond the uni revolve first and foremost around disasters. So extreme events, but I'm going to take it to the impact of these events into the sort of disaster space, disaster studies space as we call it. So most of my team's research at the uni has focused over the past 20, 25 years around the experiences of less heard voices in disasters. So we do a lot of work with NGOs, with local government agencies. In my case, most often overseas, in particular in the Philippines, where I've spent most of the past 28 years. But we have been observing that people with disabilities, older people, children, gender minorities, ethnic minorities, people in detention, people experiencing homelessness are always kind of invisible in what we call disaster risk reduction. And that has been our work over the past 20 years or so to try to understand their experiences in disasters and from there to fit back into the practical work we do with these NGOs and trying to develop some tools, what we call participatory tools, to foster the participation of these minority groups into what we call, again, disaster risk reduction. I read a few days ago that the expected level for the scholarship geography is uni second year kind of tests and exams, isn't it? I saw that on the NZQA website. So I'm going to pitch my lecture, maybe not exactly as I would pitch it to my second year student, but I got a lot of materials from my what we call stage 2 level course here, which is the second year at the uni. And hopefully, beyond helping you to do well at the scholarship exam at the end of the year, it could be, I hope, a teaser for you coming to the uni, doing geography, doing work with us in the future. Next year, you're all year 13, right? So it might be the time now of the year when you choose your course at the uni. So hopefully that can be a teaser for us to lure you towards our courses. So I've titled I don't like to call it a lecture. There will be some interactive activities. You won't remain seated for the whole time. But I've pitched it around the very frequently used expression, natural disaster. And I want to reflect upon whether there's such a thing as what we call a natural disaster. Which is a very controversial concept in our field of studies and field of practice. And I want you to be a bit critical about how we deal with these concepts. So I'm going to take the topic of extreme events to their impact and how we understand the impact of these extreme events. So basically, it's about what a disaster is. And I won't question the word disaster. We'll take it as something that exists more or less everywhere in the world. And this is a point of contention for some of us. But we'll assume that there's such a thing as a disaster. Our concern will be about the causes of these disasters and whether extreme events or nature in its extraordinary dimensions could be the cause of these disasters. And we'll challenge that idea. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay, so before we get anywhere further, I want to preface the class with one caveat, which relates to why you have this topic this year for your scholarship exam. It's probably because of this. So these are the data from the most trusted database that we use when looking at disasters. And I was at Max this morning, and I was looking at the geography level 2, level 3 exams. There was one on Bangladesh flooding, and they were using exactly these data. The data are what they are. We could question the data set, but it shows a trend, which is an increase in the number of disasters over the past 60, 70 years, during the second half of the 20th century. We have to keep in mind one thing here about the data set. It is that only large events, extreme events, are recorded. For an event to make it to the database, it needs to affect 100 people, at least. Or it has to kill 10 people. So 100 people affected, 10 people killed. Or there's a call for international aid. Or now they've added that there's a sort of state of emergency, whatever it's called in the local context. So we're looking more at large events, extreme events. Does that have a significant impact for the society that's affected? And the trend is an increase. And this is probably the rationale for your scholarship exam. The number or the impact of extreme events is increasing, or has been increasing. It's kind of plateauing over the past 10 years, 10-ish years, 20 years, yes? Thanks. So the impact of these extreme events is increasing. Now, we need to keep in mind, and this is important to me, that this is just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about disasters and natural hazards. I'm just using another database here, just to nail a point. And I'm using data from Colombia, and I'm using data for the last 20 years of the 20th century, which is when we had the most significant or rapid increase here. So if we look at Colombia, for the same database, for the last 20 years of the 20th century, we had 62 events recorded. Now for Colombia, there's another database available called Desinventar, which was developed out of Colombia back then. The data set is reliable to the point that now this database is being used by the United Nations. They've kind of co-opted the data set. For this alternative database that captures not only the large events, but as well the very small landslide that may have affected a single family in the hills or in the mountains, you have a huge discrepancy in the number of what we call disasters. For the same period, this alternative database records more than 7,000 events, meaning that the impact of these extreme events, does that have a significant impact for those who are affected? It's just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about disasters. And we talk about all these other small events as sometimes silent disasters, neglected disasters, silent crises. They fall through the cracks. They fall under the radar. And we know, except for the larger events that have an impact in terms of death toll, we know that the cumulated impact of these small, very frequent events is higher than the impact of large events, except for mortality. But when it comes to people's everyday life, there's a sort of ratchet effect. You haven't recovered from the previous landslide or small flood, that you have to deal with another one, and another one, and another one. So we often forget about the smaller events. But they are very, very significant for people on the ground, especially those who live in poverty. I wanted to make this preface just for you to have the context for the extreme events. They are just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about disasters. This is super important to keep that in mind. For those who are most affected on the ground, they are less significant than the smaller events. And I'm going to return to one particular example afterwards. Does that make sense? As a preface? Okay. Now, let's get into the core of what I want to share. And that starts with what a disaster is. How do we define or delineate what a disaster is? I want to ask you the question first. Oh, I should have done that before, sorry. Could you all grab a small piece of paper and write one word, the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word disasters? If you could write in big letters, the first thing that comes to your mind, you hear the word disaster. One word. Right? Once you're done, if you could come down, grab a small piece of masking tape here, and stick your word up on the screen here. This theater is not very conducive. We've got no space to stick things on the walls. So let's come over here. You come down, and you stick up your words here. And we'll see what you think. There's no wrong answers. Awesome. Teachers lead the way. Perfect. One word. If you could write in big letters, that would be good. Is it me or if it's very hot here? You're safe. The last one standing will read out what we have on the screen. Come down, come down. I like my classes to be messy and noisy and bubbly. We may put a bit more light for this. Okay, nice. This is a very bleak picture. Havoc, okay. Death, chaos. Oh, I like this one. Damage, death. I do this activity for the first class of my third-year course on disasters. I get the same thing. I mean, some of you did that. I probably did it back in the, you were season 4 of 325, so 2014? Oh, sorry, I'm giving a hint of your age. Shouldn't. Oops, sorry. There are more on the other side there as well if you want. Catastrophe, distraction. You can, okay. Oh, I've got more tape. I've got more tape. There you go.
I've got 3.
Okay, that's fine. Overachieving. Oops, okay. So because you had 3, you will read them out.
Not on mine. They're not on
mine. Okay, that's what we could still read them out. Okay. You seem to be very keen. Okay, could you read them out briefly?
all of them?
Yes. Oh, no, you two. You two, you stand here. Yeah, you're fine, you're fine. Okay, you start then. I'll do the second one.
Okay. Consequence, impacts, displacement, destructive, crisis, vulnerability, harmful, bad, harm, destructive, death, profit, harmful, impacts, significant, toll, I can't read those ones. Extreme, chaos, harmful, destructive.
Probably yes. Destructive. Oh, you're done? Okay. Okay, and on the other side, I think it's more or less the same words. Death, damage, life-threatening, death, catastrophic, death, chaos, havoc, life-changing, altering, destruction, damage, destruction, catastrophe, dangerous, destruction, challenge, cyclone, death, damage, and tragedy. So there's an interesting emphasis on, obviously, the harmful impact of these events, which is definitely what characterizes what we call disasters. Whether it requires people to die or not is a very subjective thing, because you may have lost all your harvests, for example, and seeds, and it may affect your ability to survive on the long term without having a direct impact in terms of life-threatening events. But there's an emphasis on the impact, the damage, the destruction, not so much on the causes. And I'm not sure if it's because it reflects your curriculum. There are two interesting words. One here is cyclone, and the other side we have vulnerability. If you're already thinking in terms of vulnerability, year 13, you could probably jump straight third year uni, because this is a super important concept that we discuss in my third year course, for example. And we're going to use it in a minute to try to explain why we have such a harmful impact, why we have so many deaths, so many destruction, so much destruction following these disasters. And we'll try to compare the relative significance of cyclones and other natural phenomena like landslides, floods, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, with the relative impact of what we call vulnerability. Forgot where it is. Vulnerability. And we'll associate vulnerability with the susceptibility of the society, our communities, our people to be affected. So we'll associate vulnerability to those who are facing these natural phenomena that we call natural hazards in our jargon. So we'll try to confront these two perspectives in a minute. So that's very, very good. There's an interesting word here, profit, which is definitely something that we discuss in some of our courses. We won't touch upon this here. This is beyond the scope probably of this class, but this is definitely something that's happening through the recovery initiatives that we observe following disasters. But that's awesome. We have a good picture of what a disaster is. So you've basically captured this dimension of the disaster, the impact, the harmful impact for people and their livelihoods. By livelihoods, I mean all the resources that people rely on to sustain their everyday concerns and needs, whether they are economic, cultural, social, or natural. So you've captured that very well. And in these two words there and here, cyclone and vulnerability, you've captured the two sides of this diagram. For a disaster to occur, we need these two components. We need a hazard to occur, what we call a hazard, so a cyclone, an earthquake, a flood. But we need this natural event to hit people, communities, and societies that are vulnerable. An earthquake in southern Algeria in the Sahara Desert is not really a hazard. There's no one living there vulnerable to suffer death, destruction, damage. So you need these two components for a disaster to occur. It's only when the hazard hits those people, those communities, those societies who are fragile, vulnerable, that the disaster occurs. That being said, those people who are exposed to these hazards are never only vulnerable or fragile. They always exhibit or display what we call capacities. Whether it's in facing extreme events or in facing small-scale, recurring floods, landslides, small cyclones. People have capacities. People are not helpless, people are not stupid. They have knowledge, they have skills, they have resources. They have local knowledge of what's happening in their village, in their town. They share this knowledge with their kin, with their relatives. They send remittances from overseas to support people in time of hardship. There are social networks that operate. And they have skills. Some people are nurses, some people are doctors, some people are engineers. And all the time, they use these resources, these skills, to support in time of hardship and disasters. So people are never helpless. And these two things, vulnerability and capacities, are not the two ends of the same spectrum. You may be very vulnerable with very few capacities, or you may be vulnerable with a lot of capacities. And I'll explain probably why these are not the two ends of the same spectrum afterwards. But this is crucial in thinking of the impact of extreme events. So this is the sort of theoretical picture around the impact of extreme events, or what we call disasters. Now, what I want to spend the coming maybe 30 minutes or 20 minutes talking about is which of these two sides of the diagram is the most significant in explaining disasters and the occurrence of disasters. Are we actually having more disasters because we have more cyclones, more extreme events? Or are we having more disasters because vulnerability is increasing? That's two possibilities. There are two other possibilities. One is that our capacities are decreasing. And it could be as well that we have more people, more communities, more infrastructure located in areas that are prone to hazards. We have more people living near the coast, prone to storm surges. We have more people living on the slopes of volcanoes. So even if they are not so vulnerable, if a hazard occurs and 10 people are affected by volcanic ashfall or by flooding, then they make it to the database. Or the fifth option is that it's a combination of everything. More hazards, increasing vulnerability, decreasing capacities, more people exposed, all together. So what I'm trying to do here is to gauge somehow the significance of extreme events. And obviously they are more cyclones associated with climate change nowadays than there were 50 years ago. But is it the crux of the issue here in explaining why we have so many disasters nowadays compared to 60 years ago? And I'm not even mentioning that obviously the recording process was imperfect for the first half of the 20th century. This is another issue. Does that make sense? So I want you now to answer this question. Not anymore with a small piece of paper. I want you to go into this Menti quiz. I'm not sure if you're used to use Menti. It's a small online polling software. So if you scan the QR code, it should pop you into a Menti window with the question I just asked about the causes for the increasing number of disasters. Are you all in? More or less? Are you seeing the question? Yep. So you can answer 1, 2, 3, or all 4 options. Make sense? Can I swap sides for this? Okay. Interesting. Wait. Should go for this game. Okay. Okay. Interesting. How many of you in the room? 40-ish, 50-ish maybe? Interesting. So most of you so far think that it's because we have more people, more communities, more infrastructure exposed. But it's actually relatively split. I like what you're doing. This makes a lot of sense because this is going to be very near what we're going to argue in the coming minutes. This is very, very good. Again, I'm not going to argue that we are not dealing with an increasing number of climate hazards. This is a fact. And this is a truth we have to deal with. But at the same time, we don't deal with more earthquakes or more volcanic eruptions nowadays than 50 years ago. So the explanation around the hazard only works for climate hazard. And this is a significant thing, and we need to focus on this. This is important. But, and you clearly capture that in your words, there's something else happening. We cannot explain this only with climate change. It's not enough to explain such an increase. It's definitely a factor, but it's not the only one. And you nicely capture that there's something happening with societies. Now, you pointed to increased exposure. Fair enough. And that relates to population growth, which was your topic last year, right, for scholarship? Oh, no, it was not you. You were year 12 last year. But it was the topic for last year. Hopefully you haven't repeated the same year. Population growth is an issue. Migrations are an issue, with people moving out of places that are safe, away from the coast, for example, and moving towards the coast, pushed by agrarian issues, pushed by conflicts, pushed by many other political and social issues that force these people to live in areas that are prone to hazards. Could be on volcanoes as well. But it's not because you live in an area which is exposed to hazards that you are vulnerable. By nature, it's two different things. If you compare two countries like the Netherlands, I'm sure there's someone who's half Dutch amongst you. Anyone half Dutch or Dutch? No? This is very rare. In all my classes, there's at least one Dutch student or half Dutch student. Interesting. There's one? Oh yeah, there must be one. But if you compare the Netherlands, for example, right? Super densely populated country. Very low-lying, very prone to floods. 70 years ago, the Netherlands were dealing with massive flooding problems. If you compare to the Netherlands to Bangladesh, for example, another low-lying coastal country, super packed. You have more disasters happening in Bangladesh than in the Netherlands. So population density, the number of people being exposed, doesn't explain everything. It's not because you live in an area which is prone to hazards that you are necessarily vulnerable. In my classes, I talk about other phenomena like earthquakes. There are places in the world where you can buy very expensive furniture under which you can drop and seek shelter in case of an earthquake. You have water underneath, you have food underneath, you can survive for a few days. Same thing in terms of flooding in France. I know there are houses you can actually seal, completely seal, in facing flooding. But these things are very, very expensive. They are not affordable in Bangladesh compared to the Netherlands. And this is not because there are many people in the areas prone to hazards. There's another issue, which is what you call vulnerability. So if we want to understand the impact of extreme events, we have to understand the vulnerability of societies. And I'm not exactly sure, I haven't read the whole pitch for your scholarship exam this year, but you can't think about extreme events and their impact without looking at the context and why people are exposed and vulnerable in facing these extreme events. The thing is, the dominant discourse at the moment, or I would say the dominant discourse up to maybe 20 years ago, now it's changing. But it's long been always a matter of extreme events. And this is why I want to kind of contextualize again the topic for this year's scholarship. Very often, we consider these extreme events as extraordinary. Extraordinary. They are beyond the normal, beyond the usual. And if you look at the adjectives we often use with these extreme events, we talk about unbelievable events, unpredictable, unexpected. There's always something, which means that we dissociate these events from the everyday life, from the normal, quote marks. Here we are showing, this is a cartoon in an American newspaper following Hurricane Sandy that hit New York in 2012, if I remember well. They are looking at a monster. This is beyond what we are dealing with in terms of storms. This is something which is extraordinary. It's extreme. It's not something we experience on an everyday basis. It's beyond the normal. It's unbelievable, unexpected, something, always. And because they are something, because they are extraordinary, the assumption is, and I'm not sure that may well be in the pitch for this year's scholarship, because these are extraordinary, we assume that people don't experience these events very often. And because we don't experience them very often, we assume that we don't know about the danger. If it's unexpected, unscheduled, unprecedented, then we assume not to know. Meaning that our perception of the danger for ourselves, what we call the perception of risk, is likely to be low. And if we don't perceive the danger for ourselves, that means that we are unlikely to take appropriate actions. to face these extreme events. This is the whole chain of thinking that's behind pitching extreme events as the causes of disasters. Because they are rare, because they are extraordinary, unexpected, they affect people who are unprepared, who don't know. And often we associate, of course, these places that are underdeveloped, that are overpopulated, so it's always outside of the everyday, outside of the normal social fabric. That's the whole discourse, the whole what we call a paradigm around extreme events. We are assuming that they are significant because they are rare and we don't have experience, so we don't understand the danger, so we don't take appropriate actions. That doesn't really work. And I'm going to show you just one example out of the blue. One of my favorite examples, and I have seen that firsthand. An example from Comoros. Do you know where Comoros is? Small island country between Madagascar and Mozambique. There's a huge volcano. This is the main island of Grand Comore. There's a huge volcano. Most of the island is made of the volcano, and you have cities around the volcano. The volcano is known as Mount Cartala. In 2007, the volcano erupted for the first time in decades. Volcano, tropical country, means lahars, like we have at Wapehu and in some other places in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So this mixture of volcanic materials and water that flow down the slopes of the volcano. And in Comoros, as everywhere in the world, lahar materials make very good construction materials. You can make hollow blocks, you can make some sort of cement to build houses. And there's a huge demand. It's a very poor country, but there's a huge demand for building houses, sturdy houses. Now these guys realize that the volcano erupting might be a very good resource in their everyday life. That they could collect sand and build hollow blocks. They knew that the lahar could be destructive, but what they did after the first lahar season, the first rainy season, is that they rerouted the river towards their backyard. So they took the hazard towards their own home. Because they had a very high perception of what may happen. Just to control the resource, just to have the lahar, the hazard, in their own backyard. Because it was providing them with a resource that would help enhance their everyday life. Second lahar season, their houses got partly buried by the lahar because they used small dikes to take the water towards their own backyard and houses. And then eventually they rerouted again the river where it used to be, because they realized, oh, this is too much sand. No one died, fortunately. But the thing here is that we can't dissociate extreme events from people's everyday life. And I know back in the days I was kind of hammering you in class on this, but you can't dissociate extreme events from people's everyday life. People make decisions in facing extreme events based on their immediate concerns in most places in the world, including in wealthy Western countries. In that particular case, if you don't have enough to put, or enough food to put on your plate next month, you won't see the next rainy season, next cyclone anyway, and the next lahar. So it's better to sustain your everyday needs over the potential threat of a cyclone, a volcanic eruption that may happen in the case of the volcano next 10 years, 20 years. It doesn't matter compared to your ability to sustain your everyday needs in the context of poverty, for example. It's the same thing in Western wealthy countries, where we tend to balance the benefit of a nice view, for example, versus the potential harmful effect of a storm in 10 years or in 20 years. The benefit you gain in your everyday life from living along the coast with a nice view is the same. It doesn't mean that you don't understand the danger for yourself. It's just that you contextualize these extreme events within your everyday life. Does that make sense? Yeah? So my point is that you can't think about extreme events in a silo. You have to contextualize. People make decisions based on a lot of different things. Extreme events are just one dimension of their everyday life. I have heaps of examples of this kind that I usually talk about in my third year course. Does that make sense? So that means that, again, there can't be only extreme events to explain why we have more disasters nowadays. And it's not only a matter of exposure. Again, I'm not saying that the hazard and exposure are not important dimensions of disasters. If there's no hazard, if there's no people, there's no disaster, so we need to take that into account. I'm just trying to gauge the relative significance of all of these factors. And obviously, the reason why these people had to take risk purposefully have nothing to do with nature and these extreme events. It was to sustain their everyday concerns. Now I'm going to show you, so we're looking now for what I call the root causes of vulnerability. I'm going to show you this picture from the Philippines. This is my favorite picture. It's all dated now, but the point is the same. What can you see? So these two, by the way, these two houses were affected by the same cyclone. The cyclone killed 1,500 people back in late 2004. These two houses sitting next to each other were affected by exactly the same mud flow with a lot of logs and mud coming down from the mountains. What do you see in the pictures? Same location, next to each other. What can you see? Yep. Disproportionate? Absolutely. Why is it?
Because the smaller house on the left is way more damaged and they won't be able to live there. The house on the right can be fixed and can be used in the future.
Absolutely. This is the whole point. This one, which is not a poor house, it's not a poor household, but their small house was buried or flooded up to the second floor, what stands as the second floor. People had to evacuate, as you guessed, and this was taken a few months afterwards, and actually 6 months afterwards, they hadn't come back. The place was transformed into a billiard place. This house here, built on an embankment, the water didn't even get in the house. If there was an embankment, there was a reason. People knew that it could be flooded. The house had 3 floors. Water tank, one of the main issues was securing potable water after the cyclone. They had a big 4x4 vehicle. Once the road was cleared, they had access to their house, access to the road, fine. Not a disaster for this family on the right-hand side. The point here is that the ultimate point is there's no single disaster, whether associated with extreme events or smaller scale floods, landslides, whatever, that kills everyone. There's no single event where everyone is affected in the same way, where everything is destroyed. Even in what we would call the worst case scenario, like the 2004 tsunami in Indonesia, for example, 2011 tsunami in Japan, there are always people who survive while others perish. There are always people who can evacuate while others can't. There are always houses that withstand. After the tsunami in 2004 in Indonesia, you had some houses that survived the tsunami. All the mosques were fine, for example. Some people can walk up. Some people can't because they are too fragile or frail. too old, too young. So the point is, it's not so much the extreme event, and that was an extreme event. It was actually 4 back-to-back cyclones within the span of 10 days. It had never happened, apparently, in the Philippines before. 4 back-to-back. But it was not so much the cyclone. It was about who had access to the resources to protect themselves and who didn't have access. And these resources, wherever in the world, are most often available locally. The knowledge is available, the science, the technology, the money. This is a poor region of the Philippines. Poor, quote marks. The resources were available, but some people had access to them, others didn't. So the point is who has access and who doesn't have access to the resources to protect themselves in facing these extreme events. And obviously the reasons why some have access and some don't have access have nothing to do with the extreme events. They have nothing to do with nature. So back to my earlier point, if you want to understand the impact of extreme events, you have to understand everyday life. You have to understand how society is structured. I would say at stage 3 or maybe stage 2 level at the uni, it's a matter of power relationships. Vulnerability in facing extreme events reflects how power and resources are shared within society. Extreme events are, as in this picture, some sort of trigger. They emphasize the inequalities. They emphasize the disproportionate poverty across different sectors of society. Again, I'm not saying that the extreme events are not important, because you need the extreme events. You wouldn't have a disaster without the extreme events. My point is that, unlike in the previous kind of explanation, extreme events don't happen outside of the normal social fabric or the everyday social fabric. They are very much extending everyday life. If you're suffering from a disaster of this kind, you're suffering from something else in everyday life, whether it's poverty, whether it's hunger, whether you're affected by a conflict. So many disasters of the past 3 decades have affected places of armed conflict in the world. In Indonesia in 2004, you had a lot of people who were living on the coast because they had migrated out of the hinterland because they were fleeing torture and persecution by both parties, the Indonesian army and the Aceh Liberation Front. So when you suffer from disaster, you're likely to suffer from something else in the first place. You will find exceptions. Yes, probably. But there's a pattern. Extreme events don't happen outside of everyday life. They are not extraordinary. They extend the ordinary, which is a very different way of looking at things. So I'm getting excited here. Any questions, queries so far? I may skip this one because I've got a Kahoot quiz with some prizes afterwards. The point here was to show you that those who are affected by disasters may in fact increase the hazards, not because they don't know again, but because they have no choice. In this particular case in Jakarta, people throw the rubbish in the river. They know it's going to increase the flooding problem. They know it's going to increase waste management issues, but they have no choice. Better to throw the rubbish in the river, knowing that it's going to increase flooding in case of extreme rains or rainfalls. But they have no choice because if there's no proper rubbish collection system, and if they were to throw the rubbish in the street on the other side of the picture, both sides, there would be rats, mice, whatever in the neighborhood, meaning that they would be exposed to other diseases like dengue and other illnesses that may affect them in their everyday life. So better to avoid the disease, better to avoid dengue, rather than and being affected by flooding in 10 years. Because these illnesses, whether associated with rats or mosquitoes or whatever, are a daily kind of occurrence, a daily threat, versus flooding that may happen only once a year, maybe once every 5 years. So there's an increase in the hazard as well, which stems or results from the same kind of issues around the lack of access to resources. We don't have too much time to go into this. But in short, and in summary, if we want to understand the impact of, first, in the case of Indonesia, if we want to understand, I can share the slides. If you want to understand the impact of these extreme events, you have to understand why they occur, and they may occur because people have no choice but to degrade the environment, like in the case of Indonesia, to sustain their everyday needs. But you have first and foremost to understand, and this is a complex diagram, I won't go into the details, but you have to understand why some people are more vulnerable. And that's why your word here, vulnerability, was so clever and so important in the first place. Because this is the main lens we use to understand why some people suffer more than others in facing these extreme events. And if you want to understand why some people are more vulnerable, you have to understand how resources are shared within society. Why some people are more wealthy than others. Why some people have more access to scientific knowledge. Why some people hold on to their local knowledge more than others. We haven't talked too much about capacities. We haven't had the time for that. Does that make sense? Now, we have 8-ish minutes just for a quick recap. And I don't want to do the recap myself. I've spoken too much. I want to run a Kahoot quiz. You're still acquainted with Kahoot, right? You love Kahoot, right? I've got some prizes. I'm sure you love M&Ms. Yes? I've got some mochis and I've got some White Acres chocolate. Top 3. So it's basically about reviewing the key points we just emphasized. Are you all ready? Top 3. It's only 4 questions, right? Oh, wait. The answers are already here. Wait. Host live. Okay. So it's taking time. Okay. Here you go in Kahoot. I'm not sure how you do it at high school, if you use pseudonyms or if you use your real names. Feel free to put whatever you want. You're very serious. At the uni, students wouldn't use their real name.
Because I'm in public schools, I use it.
Okay.
When morning nickname, it automatically corrects it to like silly plus it as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, a few more seconds. Are you all in? 25. So we've got people doing it in tandem. You have to share the chocolates if you win. I like Kahoot. The only thing that annoys me with Kahoot is the musical background. But that's part of it. That's part of it. Okay? Okay, let's make a start. 4 questions that summarize the key points of my class. The first one is there such a thing after what we've discussed? No, that's the 4th one, sorry. The first one is about what a disaster is. Sorry, my bad. It's a punchy one. I promise I won't ask who's the person who provided the wrong answer. I take it as someone who was too quick to press the button. But yes, obviously, and this is one thing, right? From now on, I hope no one will use the expression natural disaster to talk about a cyclone, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption. These are natural hazards. They are not disasters. There needs to be affected people for a disaster to occur. Right? Don't use the word disaster for natural phenomena. They are just natural phenomena that become hazardous when people are exposed and vulnerable. So that's very good. We'll skip the temporary ranking. Kind of similar picture to the one you saw before. This is from the Philippines as well. This is from the Philippines. Oh, right, okay. Huh? Wait, why? Wait, was it wrong? No. Ah, sure, wait. Oh, my bad, sorry. Okay. Ouch. Stupid. Okay, so that skews the whole thing for the ranking. Can I actually drop one question from the ranking ad hoc afterwards? We'll try. My bad, sorry. Otherwise, I'll promise I'll get one thing of M&Ms to all schools, because it's my fault. I'll find a way to share this with you.
That's just like
Okay, the root causes now. We return to the root causes. Okay, so there were two correct answers for this one, and these were the correct answers. The unequal distribution or unequal access to resources, as in the case of the pictures before, and obviously there are political decisions behind this. We haven't talked too much about the political decisions that make some people more affected than others, but you got this right in most instances. I know the lack of knowledge, this is what we were kind of pointing to with the diagram. In most cases, people know about the hazards. Not always, there are exceptions, but in most cases, people know. But they know as well that there are other issues in their everyday life that are more significant. Okay. And this is the final one. Okay, so that was the main question, right? The pitch at the start of the lecture. There's no such a thing as a natural disaster. The expression natural disaster is a misnomer. For two reasons. The obvious one at the very start of the lecture is that for a disaster to occur, you need some people to be involved, exposed, and affected. So it's not only about nature, it's about how nature affects people. That's the first reason. And the second reason is, was the main point of my argument that vulnerability is the most significant issue in trying to explain disasters. Again, I'm not saying that hazards are not important. Climate change is very important. We need to focus on it. But we can't look at climate change, natural hazards, out of the social fabric and out of the social context. Because there are people who are more affected than others, and the reasons why these people are more affected than others have nothing to do with nature. Right? So there's no such a thing as a natural disaster. Okay, now comes my problem. Can I do something about it? Can I? But I'm not sure if I can. No, that's the report. That's the Excel report. Yeah, no, this is not what I want. Or can I drop something? Maybe I can drop one question here. Wait. How can I drop this one? Can I do that? Anyone expert with Kahoot? Okay, so I owe you all. How many schools do we have? Could one of you, one per school, raise their hand? No, no tricks. It's only one M&M per. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of M&Ms. My bad. I mean, yeah, I won't show you the ranking because the ranking doesn't make sense, right? Okay. So you can share these first. How many M&Ms in one pack? Well, at least I hope you all have one M&Ms before you go. So feel free to grab one M&Ms. And I'll get you more via Mallory or I'll find a way. Okay, that was me. I hope you got something out of this. So I'm going to share the recording. So the recording includes the voice and the slides. If you want the slides as a slideshow, I can share them as well. That's a no-brainer. And in 2 weeks, you have the next lecture with my colleague Mark Dixon, who is a professor of physical geography, who is going to talk about his work around the coast. And I guess he's going to focus more on Aotearoa, New Zealand, because he's doing a lot of work around how erosion is a big issue in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and how it affects extreme events along the shore. And in a month's time, 4 weeks, you're going to have Anthony Gample, who's one of my closest collaborators at the uni, your former classmate, I guess, in some courses, who's going to talk about the more practical side of what I talked about and how we must foster the participation of these people who are most vulnerable in policies, in actions to reduce the risk of disasters. So in 2 weeks, more on the physical side of it. In a month's time, it's going to be more on the social, policy, practical side of what we call disaster risk reduction. So that was me. Thank you so very much for coming. And thanks for coming despite the weather, because I was at Max this morning. I was telling you, I was at Max this morning doing some propaganda for our school. And Max told me, you know, weather is too bad, we won't be sending our students. You're here. So thank you so very much. I was expecting 2 or 3 students in the room, to be honest, when I saw the weather warning after checking the Max announcement. So yes, so thank you so very much for coming, and good luck for your exam. I'm going to be here in 2 weeks anyway, in Mountain. So.